They were a race so advanced from the stars that they thought no planet could stand in their way. They had examined Earth from a distance that highlights its fortifications on land, and the seemingly empty waters. They saw the water only as an abundant resource that could be harvested. Our associates' deep and enigmatic spaces made for ideal hiding spots for their ships and operations, something they felt humans lacked. The power or technology to repel the aliens from such aqueous depths. Were worried that the seas would not face any opposition when their ships arrived, quietly vanishing under the water. They moved with precision, surveying the ocean floor and determining the best way to remove its contents without creating any ripples. Riches and advanced technologies that no one on Earth had ever seen before. Sonar cloaking apparatuses and biomechanical ships made to blend in. They were nearly invisible in the aquatic setting, and their conceit was unwarranted given all they had accomplished. Numerous other planets, and since everything had always been simple there, they had no reason to think that Earth would be any different. Yet they were unaware of the seals on land, and humanity had struggled to make progress, to endure in the face of the more powerful extraterrestrial entities that had overrun cities, driving armies to flee in Earth's oceans, however, were a different story in those days, leaving chaos in their wake. Immense, uncharted depths. Humanity's last remaining covert weapon was the Navy SEALs. Underwater warfare specialists had not yet demonstrated their hand to a veteran SEAL. A man by the name of Jake had witnessed the destruction the aliens wrought and had been powerless to stop them as cities. Now that everyone had been killed and burned, it was his turn to battle. His team had been sent to the Pacific with the mission of stopping the alien invaders who believed they could claim the ocean, where the SEALs had spent years training in conditions this chilly and dark. Unforgiving, there were no strangers to hide behind when visibility was limited and operate stealthily, and where peril was concealed by every shadow. Jake's battalion was little, but each, although they lacked the advanced technology the aliens relied on, man was an adept in his profession. The SEALs' much more valuable experience came from their battles in the oceans for decades. They were familiar with the sound's propagation, underwater landscapes, and currents. They had battled through water in circumstances that would have broken weaker men, and they were aware of one unquestionable fact. While Jake and his crew were ready for the trip, the oceans on Earth were dangerous for anyone who didn't understand them. Based on the scant information they had obtained, the aliens had established operations around the continental shelf. They were mining something off the coast, but no one knew exactly what they were mining. That didn't matter. What mattered was blocking them. The SEALs had little information other than locations and an ill-defined picture of the enemy's competencies, but that was all they required. Their goal was to simply erase the danger and stop the aliens from taking over the oceans. Jake made one last check of his wet gear. He was protected from the chilly Pacific waters by his suit, which clung to him. His rebreather allowed him to swim soundlessly. His weapons were quiet knives, which were basic but effective, as he did not have the telltale bubbles to reveal his position. Anything that might notify the adversary too fast, such as bombs or handguns. His heart beat steadily. The crew moved as one, the familiar chill of the ocean engulfing him in his chest as he slid into the sea. With practiced ease, they glided through the water. Each movement was deliberate and effective, and they communicated silently. Through non-verbal cues and hand movements, their eyes are continuously searching the dark depths for indications of the enemy. He ignored his dread, since his razor-sharp attention was solely on the objective at hand. There was no space for error due to the uncertainty and focus on the current task. The extraterrestrial presence became evident as they got closer to the target. A peculiar glowing. There were buildings all across the ocean floor, and the ships were glowing strangely. Themselves were unlike anything that Jake had ever seen. They were living, organic things with tendrils that extended into the water like a squid's arms. They moved deliberately and slowly, as though while they scanned the surrounding ocean. Jake signaled to his group to stay in place and watch the extraterrestrial activities. The aliens moved with ease and confidence, believing that they believed they had no competitors, so anyone might oppose them here in the depths, but that was their first error. The SEALs only needed to be faster and smarter than the aliens to defeat them. They didn't need to match their technological prowess. More cunning. Jake gave his group a signal, and they took up their positions. That, before the aliens even realized what was happening to each guy, would strike them hard and quickly, destroying their activities. With each target knowing precisely what to do, the SEALs had mastered the art of underwater sabotage, and this mission would be similar because the SEALs moved like in the deep ocean's darkness. Jake, the shadows were invisible to the aliens, and they had no idea what was coming for them. Came back, taking off his mask as he and his companions reassembled on the deck of their little craft. This was not the end after initial reconnaissance had established the existence of aliens. It was necessary to organize the team gathered around Sodden, but concentrated after getting a close-up look at the extraterrestrial technology now, and the vessels were absolutely horrifying, with pulses acting as some sort of organic energy weaponry. Moves that seemed to defy physics and weren't even identifiable. Yet if the SEALs had learned anything from years of combat, was that Jake was vulnerable to every enemy, regardless of how skilled they were. The small staff at the core of the group was in charge of reviewing the collected data, but every man was chosen based on his unique set of abilities, including Mike the tech expert. Was already compiling a preliminary study of the extraterrestrial apparatus from their findings, consulting Tom the demolition specialist. Danny the sharpshooter was silently assessing where to position charges to deal the most damage while spotting potential weak spots. Chris, their medic, was already planning 3 steps ahead for potential injuries they would sustain in the alien constructions. May come across Jake's eyes skimming over the crude schematics they had hurriedly drafted in an attempt to decipher the alien. These alien mining operations were not merely capricious endeavors, rather. The aliens were engaged in more profound work that may have long-term consequences if they weren't stopped. It was evident that even though the extraterrestrial technology was far superior to anything advanced technology, did not mean that people understood our assoyant. Wasn't suited for the unpredictable conditions of the deep waters. Their ships were flimsy and unprepared for the Mike broke the quiet there, due to irregular currents and frequent pressure changes. Energy source that is biological and differs from anything I've seen them possibly pull energy from the water itself. Something about changing the inherent qualities of the ocean, if we can overwhelm any mechanism they're employing to access the sea. We may be able to destroy several ships at once. Jake gave a nod, saying that although the aliens' technology was superior, appeared to be reliant on a single energy source, which presented them with a serious risk. Mike, how do we overload it? Rubbed his head, realizing that we needed to get close so that I could install a hacking device on one of their primary. The biggest opportunity we have to take down the entire network is through energy conduits. But while I'm working on the system, Jake, we're going to need a diversion to divert their attention. Turned to face Tom and said, "You can rig something up," to which Tom already smiled. Taking out his equipment, "I have enough charges to create a serious disruption. Just let me know where you want them to be." Because the aliens were pressed for time, every minute they spent gathering Earths. Oceans meant more lost resources and more alien foothold, therefore the strategy had to exact. Errors could not be tolerated. Jake outlined the offensive strategy in his. While they conversed, the SEALs would re-enter the area, but in a different way. They would divide into 2 groups, Jake, Mike, and the aliens, and hit them where it hurt. While Danny and Chris covered them from a distance, Tom would head to the energy hub since they needed to move quickly. And hit hard, leaving no space for error. They then spent the following hour perfecting the specifics to ensure every man understood his place in the team, and that each person's goal was essential. Instead of using a rifle as a sniper, Danny would use underwater drones equipped with tiny yet potent bombs. Purpose was to confuse the aliens so they would be distracted from the primary sabotage operation. Chris, though the medic's main role in helping Danny, would be to keep an eye on enemy activities and notify the others if reinforcements were needed. When Jake got there, he went over Mike's last plan to hack the alien energy system and overload it. They were unaware of the potential alien defenses possessed around their systems, but Jake had faith in Mike's skills. Had penetrated enemy communications and completed operations in far worse circumstances, provided someone could manage to make it work. The team was small, but that had never been their strength. It was him. Precision gave him power, as he could accomplish more with less, and Jake felt a profound sense of trust as he observed his soldiers. They had experienced the most brutal battle environments on Earth, but now they were prepared to confront a foe unlike any they had faced before. Jake had no doubt that they were prepared, and that they wouldn't allow the aliens to capture Earth without a struggle. Was uncertain about the course of the conflict, but one thing was certain: whatever the aliens believed they had planned for, the boat swayed gently when they realized they hadn't accounted for the Navy SEALs on Earth. Beneath them, the guys silently readied their equipment now. The purpose was secondary to survival. Was about protecting their house in the only manner that they were aware of, and how Jake felt the weight of the duty on his shoulders. But it wasn't a burden, rather, it was an order that he would guide his men to do. The squad was prepared for the expedition. They would either emerge victorious or not at all from the depths. It was obvious that they would hit the aliens quickly and forcefully, there was no time to dispute that the waters belonged to Earth and no space for second thoughts. After giving his guys one more glance, Jake signaled that it was time for the SEALs to ensure they remained that way. Jake and the squad glided through the water in silence, their bodies flowing with the currents of the ocean. Led the route and kept his thoughts on the task at hand. They were deep in alien land and getting closer to the structures. They had noticed the unusual, spooky lights earlier. They pulsed through the sea like beacons. As they descended farther, it became increasingly evident how intricate the extraterrestrial operation was. They weren't simply. This complete base was constructed directly on the ocean floor of Earth to mine resources. As they got closer, Jake's senses were sharpened, and he gave the squad the signal to slow down so they could take it all in. The area, there was activity ahead, and extraterrestrial drones were examining the water. These devices were faster than anything the SEALs had while they were policing the region. Never encountered, but the aliens wouldn't be spared from the team's planned attack by speed. Jake's right-hand man, Mike, was already getting the hacking device ready. They had a limited amount of time. When the alien base reached the central energy conduit, it resembled a living thing. Whatever the aliens were employing to draw energy from the sea's depths with its tendrils stretching out into the ocean power their base, which was enormous and unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Tom was on regardless of how they were going to bring it down. As they got closer to the target zone, Jake's eyes began to scan for the best places to put the explosives. Man had been trained to know every detail of the task during the planning phase, so now it was all about execution, and then one of the extraterrestrial drones started to move. When Jake saw them, he responded right away, telling the team to break formation. The drone moved swiftly, sensors illuminating as it latched upon their location. Danny was prepared for. In a matter of seconds, the menace unleashed one of his drones, and it shot through the water like a bullet, narrowing the gap. A tiny explosion that occurred as it approached the alien machine, but the alien drone was successfully thrown off track, spinning out of control, and vanished into the night. Of the ocean, the group walked more quickly this time, getting close presently. I swam up to the alien base and felt the energy conduit pulse in front of them, glowing with an odd organic light. Jake saw his teammates strain as he worked, and he immediately attached his device. This was the most important. Tom was a crucial component of the mission, since without Mike's ability to breach the system, all of their efforts would be in vain. Jake continued to observe, his eyes scanning the base as he already put up the charges and planted them in strategic areas. The shadows for any indication of movement previously, the aliens had misjudged them, but that was not going to continue. Before long, they would understand what was going on, and then everything would go crazy. Mike's hands worked quickly. He hacked into the alien energy network by entering commands into the device, but the alien technology wasn't simple. Mike was an expert in his field and had broken into enemy systems, making him unlike anything they had ever encountered. Everywhere there are conflict zones, and this wasn't going to be any different. He just needed time, and as the minutes passed, they seemed to be hours every second. Remaining in the open raised the possibility of discovery nonetheless. Jake maintained his composure and concentration. Could not afford to lose hope. They needed to see this through to the end. Mike provided the signal. The device was set up. All that was left to do was wait a short while. The alien base would overload and eventually collapse, taking their entire enterprise with it. An alarm went off before they could go, and Jake's stomach sank. When the aliens abruptly noticed them, the surrounding ocean burst into action. Drones started to appear more quickly and aggressively than previously. Jake indicated the team to flee, but as the aliens approached, Danny's drones burst in quick succession in an attempt to fend them off. However, there were too many. Jake fired his weapon, and the water muffled the sound as he killed an alien. Tom turned on the explosives, scattering the team's machines as they hurried across the pitch-black waters. Jake felt the pressure shift when the first explosion shook the base and sent shock waves through the water. Buildings started to fall apart, but the aliens didn't stop sending out more drones. Surrounded the squad in a flurry of explosions, the water churning, and rubble as the SEALs struggled to get away. Jake pushed ahead while swimming. As quickly as his condition permitted, he was able to see the extraction spot ahead of. The alien technology was collapsing behind them due to the force of the explosions, but the base wasn't collapsing. Even though they were no longer in the trees, one of the alien drones focused on Jake's location and fired an odd energy beam that simply missed him by a few inches. He redirected the shot by twisting his torso and firing back. The alien machine burst, sending fragments of metal flying after striking the drone squarely, an odd organic substance drifting across the water, but Jake continued without pausing. The squad was nearly clear, but the aliens refused to give up. The drones were attacking from all directions, making the sea surrounding them seem like a battleground. "We're going to be overloaded." The alien base erupted in a tremendous blast, and the energy conduit, the shock wave, crashed into itself, collapsing on the ocean floor and producing a ripple through the water that pushed the alien off balance. Drones off course, the SEALs took advantage of the brief diversion to swim away. They pushed hard toward the extraction point, struggling to breathe as they arrived at the surface. The alien base vanished beneath the waters, indicating that the mission was successful. Lost their footing in the oceans of Earth, but Jake understood that this was only the beginning and that the conflict was far from done. The team gathered on the surface, fatigued but alive, having accomplished the impossible. For the time being, they had won this battle. They had engaged an extraterrestrial army, and as Jake observed his soldiers, pride began to grow. By no means were they finished with his chest, but tonight they had displayed the team's early win was fleeting as they realized that Earth wouldn't go down without a fight. Scarcely had time to gather their thoughts when Mike's apparatus detected fresh signals. More extraterrestrial reinforcements were as they traveled. Jake and his group swiftly realized that the enemy would not stand by and let their base to be destroyed. Understanding that the aliens they were confronting were merely a small portion of the power hiding beneath the surrounding ocean surface appeared to change as extraterrestrial ships sank farther below the surface. Increasing the number of drones and introducing bizarre biomechanical beings that flowed through the water with an unusual fluidity was evident that the aliens had previously misjudged them. But now they were adapting. They were sending heavier battalions designed for prolonged combat rather than just scouts anymore. And they were closing. Jake gave his crew a quick signal to advance since they needed to gather and ascend with a new strategy. The goal was now in a different league than mere sabotage. Battle for survival because they lacked insufficient explosives from the previous mission, and that there was no time to spare as alien forces were relentlessly and precisely closing in on their location. Focus on the details of the first strike, disregarding the fact that what mattered was what they did next. With their senses sharpened by the approaching threat, they swam through the water, and Jake started mentally planning their next move. But they couldn't use their current resources to outfight the aliens head-on. Their greatest option was to take advantage of their environment, the ocean's unpredictable nature, the fact that they were on Earth, and that provided them with a home field advantage that the aliens were unable to match. Mike's voice crackled over the underwater communications. "If we can, they are using the ocean's geothermal vents to power their operations down below. Try to break the flow if you can. It might give us the advantage we need." Jake didn't hesitating. Mike looked up the coordinates on his gadget to find the nearest vent. Jake informed us that if we push hard, we could be inside 10 minutes. This was the team's chance to entice the aliens into a trap and employ the ocean's ability to retaliate against the unstable geothermal vents. They might be able to cause a collapse that would stop the extraterrestrial powers for a while if they could precisely control the surroundings. Sufficient for the SEALs to escape when the water heated and the pressure increased as they got closer to the vent. The terrain beneath was rocky, with wide fissures in the seabed where hot water and gas spurted out. The ocean posed a natural hazard that may prove fatal to those who were not familiar with it. Yet Jake and his group weren't just any people. They had received special training for this. They were adept at taking advantage of the surroundings, and Tom was already planning forward, glancing at the precarious terrain in case I can impose charges along the fault lines if I can convince them to follow us through. If the vent blows, it will set off a chain reaction that might destroy everything in a few miles, as Jake agreed. Was dangerous, but they had no other choice because the extraterrestrial forces were encroaching. There wouldn't be an escape soon, so they had to move quickly. Jake and the squad broke up. Tom proceeding to initiate the charges, Mike, Danny, and Chris arranging themselves to take a defensive stance in case before the trap was ready. Aliens caught up, and it would be a vicious battle as their sleek drones moved swiftly. Forms were not making the same mistakes this time, as they slashed through the water like predators focusing in on their prey. Their strikes were more forceful because of the timing of their coordinated motions. They were ready for bloodshed after learning from the first battle, but Jake and Tom made it through the uneven terrain, placing bombs where they will be most effective, and remaining one step ahead of the alien forces started to manifest as the geothermal vents' pressure increased. Unsteadiness, the water hissed and bubbled, and Tom's hand steadied the ocean floor as it rumbled beneath their feet. They were running out of time because the aliens were getting closer and the window was about to open when he made the last charge. As the explosion was quickly coming to an end, Jake gave the crew the signal that Mike drones chased after Danny and Chris as they started to fall back into the vent and pull the alien forces into the danger zone. The SEALs used all of their tricks to fire back at them, their movements more rapid and precise than previously. Had to slow the enemy down, but they were certain that the aliens would eventually overpower them. Tom handed Jake the charges were set. The only thing left to do was entice the aliens with a little bit more and everything would end. The plan was hazardous, and there was no assurance that it would succeed. But they were left with no other option except to attempt this or risk being picked off one by one. The moment arrived sooner than anticipated, and the aliens, unrelenting and unaware of the trap they had stumbled onto, pursuit rushed into the vent chamber. Jake gave when Tom received the signal and set off the explosives. The water burst violently, destroying the ocean floor. Gas and superheated water blasted out of the geothermal vent, bursting open and ensnaring the alien. The enormous shock wave from the explosion caused ripples in the water that threw the SEALs off balance. The alien drones were torn apart by the sudden change in temperature and pressure since they were unable to endure it. Due to the explosion's impact, the vent caved in on itself, swallowing a huge sinkhole. The aliens had been led by everything in their path to their own destruction. As the environment they had attempted to take advantage of Jake and his team's narrow escape from the blast zone, their bodies aching from the strain and intensity of the extra action point. They swam as quickly as they could toward it. The conflict, but they had prevailed and survived, emerging gasping for. They realized in the air that although they had won this fight, the conflict was far from over. The aliens were unrelenting, and this was only the start of a far bigger disagreement, but for the time being they had demonstrated that Earth's oceans weren't as easily conquered as the aliens had assumed. Jake, as he saw his crew, damaged but alive. He knew they were prepared for whatever the aliens' next move would be. Thus, although the fight wasn't quite ended, they were prepared to face off. Once more, the waters surrounding them were serene, but not in the same way. That only appeared prior to another storm, so Jake knew the fight wasn't yet finished. Many extraterrestrial forces had been destroyed by the geothermal vent explosion, but their communications had been reinforcements were on their way, tracking something more hazardous and larger. Even as the aliens waited this time, they weren't playing around. Mike detected signals of a huge extraterrestrial spacecraft. It was obvious that this wasn't simply another reconnaissance mission as it approached, more larger than anything they had ever seen. This ship, which was probably a command ship housing its senior officers and outfitted with even more cutting-edge technology. The goal of the aliens was no longer only to protect Earth's waters, they also wanted to permanently eradicate SEALs. Jake assembled the group and gave them a clear directive this time. They would either win this battle or hide from it. It was obvious that the aliens had one more move in their arsenal ship or perish trying, and the spacecraft was taking it down with their operations in the region, maybe even giving Earth a genuine opportunity to retaliate. But carrying it out would be no easy feat. They were outnumbered, low on supplies, and almost completely depleted. But they had one thing: the human determination was not shared by the aliens when the size of the ship became apparent as it neared. The sheer enormity of it all stretched out like a gigantic shadow hiding the light beneath the surface. It was a floating fortress, not merely a command vessel, but Jake and his group didn't hesitate. They had made it this far by being astute and remaining one step ahead of the game. This time would not be any different, as Mike promptly evaluated the ship's structure, looking for any weak areas. Because of its size, there were gaps in its defenses that they could take advantage of, and the team knew they wouldn't be able to destroy it via brute force. Instead, they would need to depend on precisely striking the spacecraft with blows. Jake had no illusions about what they were up against or what the alien ship was intended for, even in the most painful places. Deep-sea warfare prepared to be defended by a variety of drones and layers of armor. However, he was also aware that once something reached the proper location, its intended fall would be harder the larger it got. Just get aboard the ship, set bombs at strategic places, and let it fall apart from its own weight was dangerous, but they were forced to move as the team slipped beneath the despite the overpowering magnitude of the big ship's hull. They continued forward motion. Every minute that went by, more alien reinforcements had to arrive, so they had to. As the ships positioned themselves above our association, they realized they were running late. The exterior of the spacecraft, Jake identified the place of entrance they would utilize. Mike had identified it earlier a little. The aliens probably believed that the maintenance hatch was too small to warrant heavy protection, so that's how they got in. Tight fit, but the group was prepared for this, so they managed to get into the ship's chilly, sterile interior. Within the ship, there was a labyrinth that stood in stark contrast to the choppy waters outside. The air was dense with images of bizarre, organic-looking technology and extraterrestrial structures. Jake didn't notice the faint hum, which seemed to be the ship's life force pumping with energy. Let it divert him. Their only objective was to reach the center and destroy it while moving. The crew initially ran into little resistance along the halls, but they knew that wouldn't last. The security systems aboard the ship would quickly identify them, so they divided up to cover more ground, with each man being aware of exactly what to do. While Mike worked on hacking, Tom started placing charges in strategic locations. Danny and Chris watched, prepared to combat any defenses they might encounter by hacking into the ship's systems. As they moved deeper inside the ship, opposition from extraterrestrial forces that attempted to halt them got more powerful, and drones began to flow into the corridors, attacking with a precision that belied their seriousness. This threat, but the SEALs were ready and used every resource at their disposal to fight back, moving with deadly efficiency at all times. Jake led the charge for the center, which was the heart of the matter, and they couldn't afford to slack down as every second counted. Ship, a huge energy source that drove the propulsion system and all of the weaponry. Reaching it wasn't simple, but damaging it would set off a disastrous chain reaction that would bring down the entire vessel. The center was strongly fortified, with automatic defenses prepared to eliminate any threat, and alien warriors lined the hallways. Jake advanced, eliminating adversaries with quick, accurate shots. His team closely followed, cooperating like a well-oiled machine, because they had previously overcome greater odds, and when they eventually arrived at the core, the enormous structure pulsated with energy, and they weren't about to give up. Brilliant brightness filling the room, signaling their final opportunity to depart. Tom swiftly intervened, laying the last charges surrounding the center. While Mike attempted to get around the ship's last line of defense, it was a race against time. The ship's defenses would soon become too strong to withstand the approaching extraterrestrial forces, which had only minutes to. Jake gave the squad a signal to retract the handle as the charges were set. The countdown had started, and they just a few minutes to flee before the ship caught fire. The SEALs moved quickly. They went back to the hatch, retracing their route through the maze of tunnels and avoiding enemy fire. Just as they arrived at the alien base, the SEALs repelled the relentless alien forces with a determination to survive. When the initial explosion occurred, the ship forcefully shuttered its core. Unstable as a result of the charge's tremendous energy spike, Jake and his group just managed to escape the vessel as it started to disintegrate by swimming as quickly as they could as they watched the alien ship implode under the force of the explosion. The surrounding water churned with debris and fire. Gasping for oxygen as the alien ship's debris slid down to the depths where they had defeated the extraterrestrial command vessel against all odds and impairing their activities in the area. But even as they exhaled with relief, Jake realized that this wasn't the end. The war was far from ended. There will be more conflicts and sacrifices to make. However, as of just now, they had won, demonstrating to the aliens that humanity wasn't Earth was their home, and they were unwilling to give up and concede defeat, no whatever the cost.